The dust of Dust Creek never settled. It rose with the wind in the morning, hung in the air through the dead of afternoon, and coated the back of your throat like it had always lived there, like it meant to stay. The town itself had the look of something that had given up arguing. A single main street of bleached timber storefronts, a water trough that had not been full since spring, and a sky so pale and wide it seemed to press down rather than open up. There was a livery at the east end, a boarding house run by a widow named Clara Fitch, and in the middle of everything, planted like a bad tooth that would not pull, the copper bell. It was the only building in Dust Creek with glass windows. Vic Pruitt had made sure of that. Glass cost money, and Vic Pruitt liked people to know he had it. He liked a lot of things people could see. The buckboard wheel leaning against the hitching post had been broken for 2 years. Nobody fixed it because nobody owned it, and that was Dust Creek in a sentence, full of things that belonged to the past and a few living people trying not to become one of them. Colt Mercer rode in from the north on a Thursday in late October, the wind pushing at his back like it wanted him moving faster than he cared to go. He was on a gray roan named Harrow, a horse that matched its rider in temperament, quiet, deliberate, and unlikely to be pushed. Colt was 34 years old and looked it in the way that honest men look their age, not beaten by it, but acquainted with it. He had a jaw that had not seen a razor in 4 days, a canvas duster the color of creek mud, and eyes that had learned long ago to take in a room before committing to walking into it. He had been riding since Abilene, following work that kept not quite materializing. A cattle drive that fell apart at the Pecos, a rancher outside San Angelo who had sold off his herd before Colt arrived. He had $43 in his boot, a bedroll, and no particular need to stop anywhere. Dust Creek was a one-night decision. Water Harrow, get a meal that was not from a fire he had made himself, sleep under a roof, ride out by first light. He tied Harrow at the livery and paid the boy there. Could not have been more than 14, gap-toothed and watchful. 2 bits for feed and a brushdown. The boy took the coin without speaking. Colt appreciated that. He walked the length of the main street with his hands loose at his sides, reading the town the way a man reads country he does not know. Slowly, looking for what does not fit. There was a mercantile with a faded awning, a barber shop with a closed sign, a land office that looked like it had not conducted any land business in some time. At the far end, warm light poured from the Copper Bell's glass windows into the early dark, and the sound of a badly tuned piano reached him half a block away. He went in because it was where the food would be. It was a middling saloon, not rough enough to be dangerous and not prosperous enough to be comfortable. 6 tables, a long bar of dark wood, a staircase at the back that went up to rooms Colt had no interest in. There were maybe a dozen men drinking in clusters, a card game at the table nearest the window, and behind the bar, a woman of 60 or so with gray hair pinned tight and the expression of someone who had seen everything this room had to offer and found it wanting. That was May. Colt would learn her name later. For now he took a stool at the end of the bar and ordered whiskey and whatever was being fed. That was when he saw her. She was on her knees near the far wall, scrubbing the floor with a rag and a bucket of gray water. She wore a plain brown dress, her dark hair pulled back, and she moved with the efficiency of someone who had stopped noticing the indignity of the work and started simply measuring how much of it remained. There was nothing broken in her posture. That was the thing Colt noticed first. A woman on her knees on a saloon floor, and she carried herself like she was doing something that needed doing, and not like she had been made small. Her jaw was set. Her hands moved in hard, practiced circles. She did not look up when men passed her. She did not look up for anything. Then the mop handle snapped. It was old wood, worn through at the neck, and it gave under the pressure of her grip with a crack that crossed the room. For 1 second, everyone heard it. The piano player missed a note. The card game paused, and Vic Pruitt, who had been leaning against the far end of the bar watching the room with the satisfaction of a man surveying property, turned his head and looked at her with cold, flat attention. He was not a large man. That was the first surprise if you expected cruelty to announce itself in size. Pruitt was slight, narrow-shouldered, with a thin mouth and pale eyes that moved like they were tallying. He dressed well for Dust Creek. Clean vest, silver watch chain, boots that had been polished that morning. He walked toward her slowly, the way a man walks when he knows nobody in the room is going to stop him. "That is the second one this month," he said. His voice was quiet, which made it worse. Nora did not respond. She was still looking at the broken handle in her hands. "You hear me talking to you?" "I hear you," she said. Her voice was flat, not submissive. Flat the way iron is flat, dense, unyielding, hammered into shape by repeated impact. That comes out of what you owe. He reached down and took the broken piece from her hand without asking, turned it over once, and dropped it in the bucket with a clatter. "Along with the water you wasted. The handle was rotted. I did not break it, it gave. You were holding it." "Vic," May said from behind the bar. "Stay out of it, May." He said it without looking at her. Nora had begun to stand. She was halfway up when Pruitt put a hand flat against her shoulder and pushed. Not hard enough to be a blow, but just enough to make her stumble back to one knee. A statement, a demonstration for anyone watching of where she stood. Colt saw her hands go to the floor to catch herself. He saw her knuckles whiten. He saw her stop, very deliberately, the response that had risen in her face. He watched her put it somewhere else, somewhere inside her where she kept things that were not allowed out. He had seen men swallow things like that. He had done it himself. He had never seen a woman do it with more dignity. He ate his meal. He drank his whiskey. He watched Pruitt move back to his end of the bar like nothing had happened, and he watched Nora get to her feet and go back to the bucket and pull out another rag and keep working. The piano resumed. The card game resumed. Dust Creek went on being Dust Creek. Colt put his glass down and looked at May. "What is her name?" May looked at him with the expression of someone who had been asked this question before, and had learned that the men who asked it were not always asking for reasons she wanted to encourage. She studied him for a moment. The stillness of him, the way he had not moved toward Nora during any of it, just watched, and not with the hot-eyed attention of a man constructing an excuse. "Nora," she said. "Nora Hale. What does she owe him?" May was quiet long enough that Colt thought she might not answer. Then she leaned forward on the bar and said it low, the way you say things you were tired of knowing. $200, her husband's debt. Dex Hale. He was a gambler and a sweet talker, and he ran up the tab at Pruitt's table for the better part of a year before he fell off his horse outside of Laredo and did not get up. She paused. Nora did not know the half of it until Pruitt showed her the ledger 3 days after she buried him. She had no money and no claim on anything. He told her she could work it off or he would see her removed from the boarding house Clara rents her. He has a stake in that, too. May's voice had no feeling in it, which was how Colt knew it had too much. "She has been here 7 months. She has worked off $43. Then Colt said nothing for a while. He turned his glass in a slow circle on the bar. He keeping the math honest? May looked at him with something that was almost a laugh. "What do you think?" He left shortly after. He did not look at Nora again on his way out. She was still on her knees at the far wall, and he walked past her the way you walk past something that is asking something of you before you have decided to answer. Outside, the wind had died, and the cold had come in behind it. He stood on the boardwalk for a long moment, looking up the empty street. The lamp above the Copper Bell's door swung slowly on its bracket, throwing shadows back and forth. He thought about the $43 in his boot. He thought about a man named Cal Briggs in Colorado 6 years back. A man who had died under a debt Colt could have cleared with 2 weeks of wages, and had not because he had told himself it was not his problem. He had found out 3 months later, passing through again, that Cal's wife had sold her horses to cover it and walked her children to her sister's house 40 miles east. He had not slept cleanly in 6 years, not once. He went back inside. He walked past Nora without stopping. He went to the end of the bar where Pruitt was now sitting with a ledger open in front of him, and he set $43 on the bar beside it. $200 for the Hale debt, Colt said. You are short $57. Pruitt looked at the money. He looked at Colt. That's so. I will have the rest to you by morning. I want a receipt. Pruitt was quiet for a moment, his pale eyes doing their arithmetic. Then he smiled, and it did not reach anything above his mouth. You buying yourself a bargain, cowboy? Colt looked at him with eyes that had stopped being patient. I am paying a debt that should not exist. Write the receipt or tell me you will not. Either one tells me what I need to know about you. Pruitt wrote the receipt. Colt rode Harrow out to the edge of town before dawn. The night was black and perfectly clear, stars thick above the cracked plain, cold enough that his breath came in short white flags. He had $57 now because he had spent the night in a game at the Copper Bell's back table. Not cheating, which he did not know how to do, but playing the way a man plays when he has to win and knows cards well enough to engineer most of the conditions. By 2 a.m, he had it. He went back to Pruitt's office and completed the transaction with no witnesses but the receipts, one of which he folded and tucked into his duster. Then he saddled Harrow. He sat at the edge of town for a while, looking east at the black horizon beginning to bruise purple. He thought about leaving. There was nothing keeping him. He had done the thing. He had paid what needed paying. He could ride south toward Del Rio or north toward Amarillo and never think of Nora Hale again. She would find out in the morning. She would be free. He did not need to be here for that. Harrow shifted under him, impatient. "I know," Colt said aloud, to no one. He rode Harrow back to the livery. He paid the gap-toothed boy for another day. He did not examine this decision for any longer than was useful. Nora found out on a Friday morning. She arrived at the Copper Bell at 6, as she always did, for the morning scrub before the place opened. May was already behind the bar, putting bottles in order, and she looked at Nora when she came in with an expression that was hard to read. Careful, and then deliberately neutral, which Nora had learned meant something was being withheld. She collected her bucket from the back room, filled it from the pump, and was on her knees at the near wall when Pruitt came down the back stairs. He was dressed already, which was unusual. He stood at the base of the stairs for a moment, looking at her with his head tilted, and then he smiled with his mouth. "You can stop that," he said. She looked up. "Your debt has been cleared." He let the sentence sit in the air a moment. "Your cowboy came by 2 nights back and bought you free, paid your husband's $200 in full." His voice was easy, conversational. "The way a snake is easy when it is already decided. Generous man. Must have seen something worth the investment." Nora stopped moving. She was very still on her knees on that floor. "I am sure he will want something for his money," Pruitt said, and let the implication coat everything it touched. "They always do." She left without responding. She did not take the bucket. She walked out through the front door of the Copper Bell into the morning light of Dust Creek's main street, and she walked with her spine straight and her hands at her sides and her jaw in its iron set. And if anyone had been watching, they would have seen a woman keeping herself together through the same mechanism that holds a dam, not through ease but through structure, the accumulated reinforcement of too many prior occasions. She found Colt in the livery. He was brushing Harrow down with a wide-toothed comb, working from the horse's shoulder down the flank in long, deliberate strokes. He heard her come in. The quality of his stillness told her he had heard her step on the dirt before she had crossed the threshold. But he did not turn immediately. He finished the stroke he was on, then he turned. She stood in the shaft of morning light from the open livery doors, and she looked at him with a fury that had been refined over the last 10 minutes of walking into something specific and precise. "Was it you?" she said. Not a question. He looked at her and said, "Yes, $200. "Yes." The muscle in her jaw moved. "I did not ask for that." "No," he said. "You did not. I was handling it." He said nothing to this. He turned back to Harrow and resumed the brushing. "Do not do that," she said sharply. "Do not turn your back on me when I am talking to you." He stopped. He turned back to face her fully. And he held the comb at his side and he waited. "You made me a charity case," she said. "You went to a man I despise, and you put money in his hand, and you made me something he sold. Do you understand what that feels like?" "Some of it," he said. "No," she said, her voice cracking at the edges the way something cracks when it has been held too rigid for too long. "You do not. You rode in here, and you decided you understood something about my life, and you paid for it like it was a transaction. Like I was something to be settled." "I know what I did," Colt said. His voice had not changed in register. It was not defensive. It was not apologetic in the soft way people are apologetic when they want to be forgiven quickly. It was something else, sober and carrying weight of its own. "Then explain it," she said. "Explain why." There was a silence. Harrow shifted in the stall. Outside, someone's wagon passed on the main street, the axle creaking. "There was a man," Colt said, "named Cal Briggs. Out of Colorado. He had a debt about your size, could not pay it, and the man holding it was not letting go. I knew about it. I had the money. I told myself it was not my business. He was looking at the comb in his hand. He died before it resolved. His wife sold her horses, walked her kids 40 miles to family. He paused. I have thought about it every week since. Decided a long time back that if I saw it again, if I was standing in reach of it, I was not going to let the same thing happen because I had decided it was not mine to fix. The silence was different after this. Nora stood very still. Some of the burning precision in her face had shifted, not gone but rearranged. Meaning she was looking at him with eyes that were still angry, but now contained something else alongside the anger, something that had not been there a minute ago. That does not make it right, she said finally, but her voice was quieter. No, he agreed. Probably not. I am not her. I am not Cal Briggs's wife. I know that, and I am not your penance. Something moved in his face at that, brief and real and quickly controlled. No, he said, you are not. She stood there for another moment, her hands at her sides, looking at a man who had not tried to justify himself into her forgiveness and had not pretended the thing he did had not cost her something. She turned and walked back out into the light. She did not say thank you. He did not expect her to. What he did not expect was that she would come back. She returned to the livery the next morning, not to speak to him. He had done nothing to invite her, but to use the pump at the far side of the building to fill a bucket for the boarding house. She came in, ignored him where he was mending tack on an upturned crate, filled her bucket, and left. He said nothing. She said nothing. She came back the afternoon after that to ask the gap-toothed boy, whose name Colt had learned was Eli, whether he had seen her stray cat, a gray one with a torn ear she called Bracket. Colt, without being asked, said he had seen a gray cat sleeping on the hay bales at the west wall 2 days back. Nora looked at him as if deciding whether to acknowledge this. She said, and went to the hay bales and found Bracket there, asleep exactly as described. She carried the cat outside without comment, but she slowed, just slightly, at the door. You staying in town? She said. She was not looking at him. Few more days, Colt said. She left. Pruitt was not finished. Colt had understood that the morning after he paid the debt, had seen it in the deliberate ease with which Pruitt accepted the money, the way a man accepts a setback he considers temporary. Pruitt operated on a simple philosophy. He owned things until something stopped him. And no drifting cowboy with a conscience was going to be a permanent impediment. He had 2 tools available to him. He used the first one on the 3rd day. Sheriff Amos Cutler arrived at the livery just before noon. He was a large man, well-fed, with a silver star that caught the light and the resigned air of a man who knew his job was to maintain a particular order and had made his peace with whose order that was. He looked at Colt the way you look at a problem that has appeared on your desk that you were not expecting. You, Mercer? Yes. Got a complaint filed against you. Pruitt says you won your stake for that debt at cards using methods inconsistent with fair play. Colt set down the bridle he was working on. He say which methods. He says you marked the deck. Colt was quiet for a moment. There were 6 men at that table. You could ask any one of them. Pruitt employs 4 of them, Cutler said, and the resignation in his voice confirmed everything about what kind of man he was. He was not cruel. He was not stupid. He was simply compromised and had been for long enough that it had calcified into something he no longer questioned. So this is a courtesy visit, Colt said. Cutler looked at him with something that was almost an apology. Son, I am telling you, Dust Creek is a small pond. Pruitt is a large fish. You paid a debt that was his livelihood and his leverage, and he is not going to let that stand without a fight. I am not telling you the complaint is valid. I am telling you that I will be required to make it complicated for you if you stay. What about the woman? Nora Hale. Her debt is clear. That is clear, Cutler said, and for the first time something in his face sharpened from resignation into something firmer. I will hold that line. The receipt is legal, and I will enforce it. He paused. But I cannot protect you from whatever else Pruitt puts in motion. That is the honest truth of it. Colt looked at him for a long moment. I appreciate the honesty, he said, and he meant it. Cutler left. Colt sat back down on the crate and picked up the bridle again, and thought about Colorado and Cal Briggs and the 40 miles Cal's wife had walked in the cold. But then he thought about Nora Hale's hands on the floor of the Copper Bell, knuckles white, holding something in. He thought about whether staying was foolishness. He decided it was probably foolishness. He stayed. The second tool Pruitt used was more direct. On the 5th day, 2 men appeared at the livery just after dark. Not Pruitt's usual hands, but men who had the look of hired work, come from somewhere else for a specific purpose. Colt heard them come in and was already standing when they reached the stall where he had bedded down, lantern lit. What happened in the next 10 minutes was not elegant. Colt was not a brawler by preference, but he had lived long enough and hard enough that his body knew certain things without being asked. He broke the nose of the first man with the heel of his palm. He put the second man into the wall of the stall with enough force to knock the wind out of him and hold it out for a while. He stood over both of them in the lantern light, breathing through his nose, and said very quietly, "Tell him it did not take." They left. Eli, the gap-toothed boy, appeared from the hayloft, where he had been either sleeping or watching the whole time. Colt looked up at him. "Go home," Colt said. Eli disappeared. Colt's ribs were bruised on the left side and his right hand was swollen at the knuckle. He washed both in the pump water and sat back down in the stall. Harrow turned his head and looked at him with one large, impassive eye. "I know," Colt said again. Nora appeared at the livery the next morning and stopped when she saw his hand. She stood in the doorway for a moment, reading him the way she had learned to read things, efficiently, without waste of motion. "He sent someone," she said. "2 someones. Are you—" "I am fine." She crossed the livery floor without asking and took hold of his right hand with both of hers, turning it to look at the knuckle. He let her. Her hands were rough, rougher than his in some ways, the roughness of soap and water and floors, not ropes and iron. She looked at the swelling with the focused attention of a woman who had tended her own wounds for long enough that assessing damage had become unsentimental. "It is not broken," she said. "I know." She held his hand for a moment longer than the assessment required. Then she set it down carefully and stepped back. The silence in the livery was different from other silences they had shared. Those had been the silence of 2 people who did not trust each other. This one was something else. The silence of 2 people who had begun, without official agreement, to occupy the same space without armor. "Why are you still here?" she said. Not harshly. The question was genuine. Colt was quiet for a moment. "Same reason you are, I expect." She looked at him. "I'm here because I have nowhere to go." "That is not entirely true," he said. "Not accusing, just accurate. You could have left Dust Creek the minute that receipt was signed." She did not answer immediately. She turned toward the open doors, looking out at the cracked dirt of the main street, the pale sky pressing down. She thought about Dex and his charming mouth, and the ledger Pruitt had laid in front of her like a sentence. She thought about the 7 months of floors and bucket water and Pruitt's pale eyes. She thought about what she had become in that time and what she was working to become again. "I am not leaving because he scared me into a corner," she said finally. "I am not going to let him be the reason I go." She turned back to look at him. "When I leave, it will be because I chose to." Colt looked at her for a long moment with those eyes that had learned to take in a room before committing. Then he said, very quietly, "That is a good reason." She stayed 3 more minutes. She did not make an excuse to leave. She simply left when she was ready to leave. Colt watched her cross the main street toward the boarding house, her spine straight, her hair catching the morning light. He thought, not for the first time, but for the first time, without immediately redirecting the thought, that she was remarkable. The confrontation with Pruitt came on the 8th day. Colt had been expecting it, not because Pruitt was reckless, but because he was the kind of man who could not allow a challenge to his authority to simply stand unremarked. He needed a public resolution. He needed the town to see him win. He came to the livery in the afternoon with Cutler at his back. Cutler with the resigned expression of a man attending an event he cannot prevent, and 2 of his regular hands on the boardwalk outside. He stood in the livery doorway and looked at Colt, with his pale eyes doing their calculation, and his thin mouth arranged into the expression of someone prepared to be reasonable. "I want to make you an offer," Pruitt said, man to man. Colt was standing at Harrow's stall. He had stopped what he was doing when they came in and was now simply waiting, arms at his sides. "I will buy that receipt back from you for $250, Pruitt said. $50 profit. You ride out today. Nora Hale comes back to work off the original debt, which she agreed to." He paused. "My patience is a limited resource, Mercer. I am telling you that plainly." Colt looked at Cutler. "Sheriff, you hearing this?" Cutler's jaw moved. "Mr. Pruitt, if the debt is settled by receipt, the woman is free of it. That is the law." "I am making a private business proposition," Pruitt said, and his eyes did not leave Colt. "I'm not asking the law anything." Colt looked at Pruitt for a long, steady moment. He thought about how to say what he was about to say in a way that was clear and permanent and that would not need to be said again. "She is not going back," Colt said. "Not for $250, not for $1,000. That is not a negotiation, and it is not a threat. It is just the truth of how this stands." "You do not own her either," Pruitt said, and for the first time his voice had an edge in it, something that had been kept under the pleasant surface coming through. "No," Colt said, "I do not. But I cleared the claim you had on her, and that claim does not come back, not legally, not otherwise." He paused. "I am not leaving Dust Creek. That is also the truth of it, so whatever you are thinking of doing next, you will want to think about whether it is worth what it costs." The livery was very quiet. Harrow breathed. Pruitt looked at him for a long time with those pale eyes, and Colt held the look without effort, the way a wall holds weight, not through force, but through the refusal to move. Pruitt left. Cutler lingered a moment in the doorway, looking at Colt with an expression that had moved past resignation into something resembling, very quietly, relief. "You got nerve," Cutler said. "I will say that. Nerve is easy," Colt said. "It is the follow-through that costs." Cutler nodded once, slowly, and left. Pruitt did not send anyone else. Whether it was the calculation that Colt was too much trouble or some private reckoning about the tide of things in Dust Creek that Colt would not know about for months, the direct pressure stopped. What remained was the slower, colder kind. The looks from Pruitt's regulars, the closed door of the Copper Bell to Colt's custom, the whisper economy of a small town processing something that did not fit its categories. But the body of the thing was done. The field had been walked. May found Colt on the 9th morning, sitting outside the livery in the thin, early sun, drinking coffee from a tin cup Eli had produced from somewhere. She stood in front of him with her arms crossed and looked at him with the expression she had refined over decades of watching men behave in ways that required her to form opinions of them. "She does not say much," May said. "I have noticed. She means a great deal by what she does not say." "I have noticed that too." May was quiet for a moment, her eyes doing their own kind of calculation, a warmer one than Pruitt's. "She came and found me last night," she said. "Asked me what I knew about you." Colt looked at his coffee. "I told her what I knew, which was not much," May said. "I told her you paid a debt for a man who was dead and had not asked you to, and you did not run when Pruitt came at you, and that in my experience that was more than most men offered." She paused. She listened to all of it, and then she said, "He should not have done it without asking me first." "She is right," Colt said. "I know she is," May said. "I am not arguing that. I'm just telling you what she said, and what she did not say." She let that land for a moment. "What she did not say," May continued, "is that she was glad it was over. What she did not say was that she had been afraid, really afraid, not just stubborn, that it was not ever going to be over, that Pruitt was going to work that ledger until she had nothing left." She looked at the main street with its cracked dirt and its bleached timber. She did not say any of that. "But I have known that girl 7 months, and I know what her face looks like when it is carrying something she is not putting down." Colt drank his coffee. "What do you want me to do with that?" he said. "Not unkindly. Nothing," May said. "Just not bolt." She looked at him once more, measuring something with those practiced eyes, and then she walked back toward the Copper Bell without further ceremony. He found Nora that afternoon sitting on the boarding house steps, mending a shirt that had a tear at the shoulder. She looked up when he came up the walk and then back down at her work without expression, which he had come to understand as her version of a greeting. He sat on the step below hers, not beside her, giving her the space of the differential without making a point of it. He had his hat in his hands, and he turned it once by the brim and set it on his knee. "May came to see me this morning," he said. "I expected she might," Nora said. "She told me some things. She talks more than she ought to." Maybe. He looked at the street. A dog was crossing it in no particular hurry, the way dogs move in towns that have accepted them as permanent residents. "Can I ask you something?" A pause. "You can ask. What do you want to do?" "After this?" "After Dust Creek." The needle moved through the cloth and pulled the thread and came back. She did not answer immediately, and he did not rush her. This was something he had learned from her already. She answered questions when she was ready and not before, and if you could not wait for that, you were not worth answering. "I had a house," she said finally. "Before decks, my father's place, west of Lubbock. He left it to me. I had to sell it when the debt came clear. Pruitt made sure I knew I would have to sell everything to cover it, and the house went first." She was looking at the shirt in her hands, not at him. "I want land again. Something of my own. Small. I do not need much. Somewhere I can put a garden without asking permission." She paused. "That sounds no," Colt said. "It does not." She looked at him sideways, just briefly. "I have been moving for 8 years," he said, "since Colorado. I told myself I was working, and I was, but—" He stopped. Started again. "There's a kind of moving that is actually staying still. You cover distance, but you do not go anywhere." He turned his hat on his knee. "I think I've been doing that." The needle moved. The thread pulled. "You could stop," she said, carefully, the word placed with precision, not pressure. "I've been thinking on that," he said. They sat in the thin warmth of the afternoon, the wind moving along the street and lifting dust at the far end and letting it settle. The sky was enormous and pale above them, and the town of Dust Creek creaked and held and went about the business of a day. Nora finished the tear in the shoulder of the shirt and bit the thread and examined the work with the critical eye she brought to everything she touched. "This town is dying," she said. "Anybody with sense can see it. Another 2 years and there will not be enough people to keep the mercantile open." "Probably right," Colt said. "So staying in Dust Creek is not no," he agreed. "Staying in Dust Creek is not the point." Another silence. A better one. "There is county land west of here," she said, her voice carrying the tone of someone stating a fact they have been storing. 80 acres, dry but workable if you know what to do with it. Clara told me about it. The price is low because nobody has wanted it." She paused. "I have been thinking about it since the receipt." "You have been thinking about land," Colt said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. "I think about practical things," she said, "not defensive, just true." "I know," he said. "I noticed." She looked at him again, that sideways assessment she had been refining over the last 9 days, calibrating him against what she knew and what she did not know yet. He sat and let himself be looked at, which was not something he was naturally inclined toward, but which he was finding. In her case, specifically, less difficult than expected. "I'm not easy to be around," she said, informing him, not apologizing. "I have been told I am not either," he said. "I mean it. I do not." She stopped, looked down at the shirt. "I spent 7 months being what someone else needed me to be, and before that I spent 4 years being what Dex needed me to be, and I am done with that. I am absolutely done with it. If you are thinking this is going to be—" "I am not thinking anything," Colt said. "I'm sitting on a step." She stopped. Something in her face shifted, the tightness of the prepared speech going out of it, replaced by something that was quieter and more honest. "That is a strange thing to say," she said. "It is a strange situation," he said. She almost laughed. He heard it, the short involuntary exhale of it, before she controlled it back. But he heard it, and it was the best sound he had heard in Dust Creek, possibly in years. They sat as the afternoon moved toward evening. Waited the light going from white to amber, the shadows on the main street growing longer and softer. Inside the boarding house, Clara Fitch moved from room to room doing her evening rounds, her footsteps steady overhead. From somewhere down the street, the sound of the Copper Bell's badly tuned piano started up again, the same wrong note in the same wrong place, Dust Creek's one reliable constant. Nora folded the mended shirt and set it beside her. She did not get up immediately. "You should eat," she said. "Not an invitation, an observation." "Probably," he said. "Clara sets a table at 6. He looked at her. She was looking at the street. "I will ask her if there is a place," he said. "She will say yes," Nora said. "She always says yes." He stood and she stood, and they went inside separately, which was to say they went through the same door, one after the other, into the warmth and the lamp smell of Clara Fitch's boarding house, where supper was almost ready, and the table had room, and the night outside was cold and vast and full of the kind of stars you only see when you are far from anywhere. Pruitt left Dust Creek 14 months later, which was sooner than the town died, and later than most people expected. He had debts of his own, the kind that accumulate when a man's principal leverage is gone and his reputation follows it. The Copper Bell was sold at auction to a man from San Antonio who turned it into a feed merchant supply house, which Dust Creek needed more than a saloon in any case. May stayed. She moved into the boarding house and helped Clara with the rooms and became, in the way of women who have outlasted everything that tried to diminish them, something essential and permanent. She and Nora had a relationship that consisted mainly of practical exchange and long silences, and the occasional afternoon where they sat on the boarding house steps and said almost nothing and meant quite a lot by it. Colt bought the 80 acres west of town. The deed was in Nora's name because she asked for that, and he did not argue because it was right. He built a structure on it that was simple and sound. 2 rooms to begin with, a covered porch, a well. He was not a carpenter by trade, but he was a man who knew how to make a thing hold, and the structure held. In the spring, Nora put in a garden on the south side, not a large one. Enough. There was no ceremony, no declaration that either of them could have said without it sounding like something from outside themselves, something borrowed. They were not people who lived in borrowed language. They lived in what they did. The meals shared, the mornings working the land, the evenings where the light went gold and then amber and then gone, and the 2 of them sat on the porch they had built together and looked west toward the horizon and said what needed saying and left the rest to sit, like something that did not require naming to be real. On an evening in March, when the wind had finally gone gentle and the first green thing had come up in Nora's garden, something small and improbable in the cracked West Texas earth, they sat on those steps in the cooling air, shoulders nearly touching, and neither of them spoke. The sky went from amber to rose to the deep depthless blue that comes just before the stars arrive. Brackett, the gray cat with the torn ear, was somewhere in the garden, attending to his own business. The land stretched out before them, theirs, quiet, needing nothing from them in this particular moment but their presence. Nora's hand was on the step between them. Colt's was near it. Not touching, not quite. The first star appeared, very faint in the eastern sky. Neither of them pointed it out. They both saw it. That was enough. That had always been enough. 2 people who had stopped expecting anything good from the particular longitude of living they had been handed, sitting in the almost dark on the porch of something they had made together, needing none of the words that lesser occasions required. The debt that had brought them here was long settled. The ledger was closed. What remained had nothing to do with what was owed. It had to do with what was chosen. The staying, the quiet, the shoulder almost touching the other shoulder in the dusk, and the willingness after everything to let the night come in.